Just like to go over the results for the pulse wave analysis and pulse wave velocity. You may remember being measured lying down with a cuff over your thigh and also a cuff on your arm. And we use the tonometer placed on your neck to try and find your carotid artery. So just explaining the results you have for the pulse wave analysis. You will have some information on the first page. This is a male, age 68. And it's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, the pulse wave is your blood pressure, the pulse of your blood pressure going through your body. So typically at the GP, you'll get your blood pressure measured at your arm. So this is a brachial cuff. And when your heart pumps, it goes, a pulse goes through your body. Your blood goes through the body in a pulse, and the highest pressure at the top of that pulse is your systolic, and the lowest pressure, the kind of the trough, is the diastolic pressure. So typically your doctor wants it'll be written like this, 120/80 if it's normal, with the first systolic written over top of the diastolic. Then what we do with this device is we get more information than that. We get what's called the central blood pressure. It's the pressure right at the heart, and it's the large artery carrying blood from the heart to the rest of the body. And we know that that's an earlier indicator for your risk of heart attack, stroke, diabetes, and kidney disease than you'd get from a normal blood pressure cuff. So if your GP says, oh, blood pressure is normal, actually this will give us a bit earlier bits of information to see if there's something that could be happening. And then this device also measures arterial stiffness, which is the elasticity of your arteries. As you get older, they naturally harden, even if you had the healthiest diet and exercise. And the stiffer they are, the more likely you are to have or to develop high blood pressure, which is hypertension as well as, and that can cause then other issues. Now, how is this arterial stiffness related to blood pressure? Well, central blood pressure is often caused, highest central blood pressure is caused by stiffening of the arteries as the heart pumps the blood through the body through the aorta, which is the main one going down kind of from your neck down to the rest of your lower legs. It moves through this whole system. As you can see, what's missing is kind of this carotid artery that goes up to your brain as well. Whenever the artery kind of splits into smaller arteries, here it goes into two to go to your arms. Same with the legs. It's called bifurcation. Some of the pressure from the wave can actually kind of come through, splits off, it gets down to your fingers, and it bounces back. So if there's kind of a big bit of pressure that the heart needs to get the whole way through, because your arteries might be stiff and they're not super flexible, and it needs to have a higher pulse, higher pressure, and then that pumps it, gets it the whole way down, but then it bounces back. So if you think of a wave pool, the wave is kind of coming back and the heart goes to pump again, but it's got this backflow. So that can be cause for concern over time. In young patients, we see the arteries are quite elastic, so they'll stretch. And so they'll be able to kind of make up for that backflow and take and kind of slow it down. But as we get older, they get stiffer, and the back pressure causes stiffness of the, which is caused by the stiffness of the arterial system. And so it's actually more important to find out what the central pulse pressure is here versus when it's already split off at your arm. Now the arm's quite easy and quick, so that's why they do it at the GP, but you can see it's not as kind of, if you think of kind of raw data, that would be kind of the information we get right at the heart versus when it's already kind of split off. And if you think of it as a photo, it's kind of got the filter on it. So just going down, the first information we get is the same thing you might get at your GP. It is your systolic, so again, the top of the wave, over top of the diastolic. So in this case, this person had 146/91. So at its peak, the top of the wave had a pressure of 146, which these bars are kind of the areas. Anything under 120 here is considered normal. Anything between 120 and 140 is considered high normal, and then 140 to 160 is stage 1 hypertension. Now, if you typically take medication for hypertension, high blood pressure, then you would expect, if you didn't take the meds, your numbers might be high. Once you've taken the meds, you'd expect them to get closer down to this 120 or lower. That's why they're putting you on the medication, so you don't have that kind of that backflow. So this person does have stage 1 hypertension, and if they're not taking their medications, they might want to consider doing that, especially if they want to start exercising. The next one is at the trough of the pulse. So again, it was still pretty high. You want below 80 for normal, but theirs was above 90, so it's still considered stage 1 hypertension. And that person might want to go get checked out at the GP and get on some medication if they are not already on it. So that's data what we got just from the first kind of blood pressure cuff on your arm. Next one, so we start to get a bit more detailed. So central systolic, it's the highest blood pressure measured during your heartbeat at your heart, not at your arm. So again, it's kind of more the raw data. Highest central systolic blood pressure is associated with higher risk of heart attack and stroke, even in people who have normal blood pressure cuff readings. So GP sends you off, yeah, you're fine, but you might have this number high. So there's no color on this one, but there is a green line in the middle on your version, and there's going to be a red line at the top and a red on the bottom. Actually, anything below this middle green line is going to be fantastic. Even if it's below the red line, that's also good. With all of these measures I'm going to go through, the lower the better. In this person's case, they had 137. So again, this is the top line here. It's above that normal threshold. Those two dotted lines are the thresholds, and the solid green is kind of the norm. And as you can see with age here on the bottom part of the graph, as with age, naturally it is going to get higher. But, this person's almost 70 years old, and it's above the dotted line. So it's above the limits, so it's not really that great. If you can have a read, if your measurement is on or below the green line, this middle one, good job, it's normal or lower for your age. And lower is always better. If it's above the green line and on top, it's above the green line, the middle line there, then it's normal, but a bit at the higher end. You should really pay attention and start monitoring your blood pressure and make sure it doesn't go higher. But if it's above that dotted line, in this case, then it is considered high compared to others your age, and you should definitely go see your GP and talk about what you can do to reduce that. If you're already in regular contact with your GP, then that's fine. Just keep monitoring. So some people will ask, what can I do to reduce that number? Well, here's your list of things. One thing I think people overlook is reducing stress. I know there's a lot of mindfulness, yoga type activities. And if you are given antihypertensive or blood pressure medication, make sure you actually take it before you want to start exercising, because your exercise will increase that blood pressure, and you don't want to have an event just because you're exercising. So take your medicines and follow these other ideas here. Your central pulse pressure, so the pulse right here at your aorta, is actually your central systolic pressure minus the central diastolic. So that top number minus the second one, it represents the actual change in pressure at your arteries during every heartbeat. So it's kind of the height of that wave. So in this person's case, it was a 46. So there were clinical studies in the UK and China, and that's how they came up with this green line in the middle. So it's important to think about where the studies come from and what your kind of genetic background may not be from there. So, take that green line that middle line with a grain of salt if you have a different kind of background. But the range of the normal limits, again, are the dotted lines. In this case, this person's a bit high normal, and as you can probably imagine, where is it? If your measurement is above the top line or above 50, it's considered high. So this person was approaching 50. So studies in the US have shown that central pulse pressure of more than 50 actually increases your risk of heart attack and stroke. So this person, kind of keep an eye on it. Again, same lifestyle measures: increase physical activity, stop smoking and drinking, reduce salt, increase fruit and veg, reduce stress. Central augmented pressure, or aortic augmented pressure, is additional pressure that's measured at your heart due to the stiffness of the arteries. So this is kind of that backflow. Studies have shown that if the high central augmented pressure is actually related to kidney failure and dementia, because the arterial stiffness increases the pressure on these little small arteries in the kidney and in the brain. Remember, I said it goes up as well. So this person had a 12. And in this case, the norm here is based on a study from the University of Cambridge. And the middle line is the healthy level of augmented pressure, and the dotted lines are the limits. In this person's case, they actually had really good augmented pressure. So they're not having a lot of backflow in this person's case. So it's not something really to be worried about if it's above the dotted line. Again, you'll consider some of those lifestyle changes. Central augmentation index is another measure of arterial stiffness. If the arteries aren't stiff, this number will be low. And it can provide an early indication of arterial stiffness well before the arterial stiffness actually increases in the blood pressure cuff that you get at the GP. So in this person's case, I like to think of this kind of as a crystal ball. Like if you're a little bit worried with some of the top numbers, this one might be able to calm you down a bit. Hopefully this one's a little bit lower if you had higher ones before, which is pretty good. Again, that dotted line, those dotted lines are the norms. So somewhere close or below the middle line is the best. In this person's case, it went really well. So now the final thing here is what's called the reference age. The machine we use is called Sphygmocor Xcel. And what it does, it uses an algorithm. So for example, we didn't look at it in these results, but it does take your heart rate. If your heart rate was slightly above what the average would be, it adds kind of 3 points. If your blood pressure was a bit higher, it might add 10 more points. So it has this algorithm that I would say you can kind of take it with a grain of salt. The other numbers that we talked about before are a bit more important, but somehow people love to have this number because they say, look, I'm 70, but I've got the arteries of a 54-year-old. So looking at kind of all things considered, this is one number that they generate and compares it with other people your age. So the reference age for this person was 54. If this is less than your actual age, then good job, you have young arteries. If it's the same, then you're normal. And if it's older, then you might want to talk to a doctor. But again, have a look at some of the things earlier on to make a decision. Do not just look at this. And sometimes I actually tell people don't even bother, because the number only ranges, this number will only go as low as 20 and as high as 80. So some people can get a bit sad, if they're 50 and their arteries are the 80-year-old, it's probably because they had a high heart rate or there was something going on. I would not get too caught up on that number. Some of the other numbers prior are going to be a little bit better to look at. This one's definitely more of an indicator. If you have kidney failure in your family and you have dementia, have a look at the central augmented pressure and see how that lands. In this person's case, it's actually quite normal. So, and they had some higher numbers up here, which can get lower as well. But in this person's case, actually he was 68, had the arteries of a 54-year-old. But yeah, as you can see, that sounds great. But as you can see, some of the numbers were a bit high. So you need to look at risk of heart attack and stroke in here. So anyway, that's all I have. Thank you.